Welcome to today's episode of What to Say and How to Say It, the podcast to help you fix your marriage. I'm Shy Lewis, and I'm here with a special guest for you today. We have Mr. J. Otis Ledbetter. He is the author of Set Free, Released from the Damage of Trauma. And just so you know, our mission here at Greater Impact is to help you, Christian married man or woman, navigate conflict and build connection so you can have a thriving marriage. So Mr. Ledbetter is the author and a conference speaker and lead pastor of Sunrise Church in Clovis, California. He holds a Doctor of Ministry degree from Liberty University. He's also the author of Your Heritage, How to be intentional about the legacy you leave, and Soul Hunger, Satisfying Your Heart's Deepest Longing. Well, welcome, Mr. Ledbetter. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's just a pleasure for me.
Absolutely. So I was reading your book, which is amazing, by the way. And in the introduction, you say that homes are being set free from collateral damage of trauma. This can be the beginnings of collateral healing in our homes. And you referenced Malachi 4:6 in that statement, the verse about fathers being reconciled to their children and children being reconciled to their fathers. I'm really curious about what you mean in that statement and really why you wrote this book in general.
I'm glad you asked that, because my last book that I wrote, that Soul Hunger book, and I thought that would be my last one. In fact, I told my assistant, if I even think about writing another book, you have permission to come in and give me a swift kick because it's so painful sometimes to write a book. And then, Shy, I sit on a board for a nonprofit that is a nationwide nonprofit. It's called Family Leadership Connection, and one of the outreaches of that is called Parenting Partners, and that is what the federal government requires of every school district to have parent enhancement programs. Parenting Partners is one of the, to me, one of the best, and it's practically in every school district in the South in America. And we're helping parents. So, but when we were in a board meeting, the president came in and he said, we've got something from the Department of Education. It's coming down the pike. And we're going to have to familiarize ourselves, and we're going to have to rewrite a curriculum. And it's called Trauma Informed. And that is in every school district now, Trauma Informed. And they talk about the emotional and the social side of what COVID did to us, of what the sex trafficking and all of that we're seeing, what it's doing to our children. And so that hit my heart. And then I heard a speaker from Teen Challenge say he has never, in the 1,400 churches that he's been in, he's never heard a preacher preach on trauma. And I thought to myself, I haven't taken that subject and specifically spoke on it. So I wrote a whole series, and I did all kind of research. I'm a counselor. I've been counseling for 54 years, and been in educational counseling, been in military counseling, and all of it. So I thought, it needs to be out there. So I wrote this Set Free from the Damage of Trauma, because that's exactly what happens when you suffer trauma. It damages you, and the collateral damage goes to your children. They feel the damage. It goes to your spouse, because trauma will cause you to act out. And even though we don't want to, there are several things that trauma will do to you. It gives you anxiety, gives you panic attacks. It strikes fear in you. It makes you angry. It makes you irritable. it creates obsessions and compulsions in you, shock and disbelief, emotional numbing, they say, and detachment. But one of the things that it does is it causes physical arousal, which means that's when you act out on the trauma. Many marriages are not staying together because of the acting out of one of the spouses for trauma that they have gone through. Now, having said all of that, let me define trauma, because most people think that trauma or event, it's an event that happens to us. I was in a bad car wreck. I lost a loved one to death. A spouse. I have a medical, traumatic, even catastrophic disease, that sort of thing, or rape, that sort of, all the way to that. There's garden variety trauma, all the way to the horrible things that happen to people that shouldn't happen to anybody. And we think that's trauma. No, those are events. Trauma is the chronic reaction to that event.
Okay.
That's where the trauma comes in. That's why 3 people, say, can suffer the same traumatic event and only one suffer trauma. The other can move through it and on the other side of it and live their life normally. They don't act out. They don't get any of the symptoms of trauma. Because they don't chronically react to that trauma. So what you see with all of those things I just mentioned to you, anxiety and anger and irritability, as I was studying trauma, you see all of that from people acting out. If you don't suffer the trauma from the traumatic event, you don't act out.
Right.
Of course. So, and that's what we're seeing in homes. COVID did horrible things to our children and to families. And today, children are acting out. Parents are acting out. They're isolating, fear and anxiety, moodiness, all of that, living by lies. All of that is what trauma does to you, out of the chronic reaction to the event.
Wow.
So
that's a lot. You just broke down. You broke it down in a way that brings up more questions for me. In the book, you said acting out. When you mentioned acting out, it was as if the person in the book, you say, is trying to create a different outcome.
Yeah.
And that has been an interesting concept for me, because when we typically, or at least for me, when I typically think about acting out, there's no rhyme or reason, but it doesn't seem to be true. Can you elaborate on that concept about the
Yes.
desire for a different outcome?
Yes, let me illustrate it so guys will understand it. I'll use athletics because guys usually are into scores and all that. Well, there's a lot of ladies too that are into it, so all of the athletes will understand that.
Okay.
They a fellow is the field goal kicker for the local football team or your local NFL, and the score is his team is 2 behind.
Mm-hmm.
And it comes down to the last few seconds of the game. He's the field goal kicker. He comes in. If he makes the field goal, his team wins the championship. In fact, we saw this in the Super Bowl last year.
Right.
So the guy comes in. He is on in his position. The ball is hiked. He kicks it, and it goes to the left, and his team loses. And he grabs his head, falls to the ground. His teammates try to console him, but he knows his inability to get that ball through the 2 goalposts is the reason he won't get a ring. That stays with him all year long, because he won't get to see a different outcome until the next game. And he can practice, he can try to get better. But what happens to him, Shai, is it goes over and over in his mind like an instant replay. And you can play the instant replay every day of that game And you might want that ball to go through those goalposts, but in that instant replay, it will not go through. It it,
Wow.
it misses every time. So when somebody suffers a traumatic event, they're going to have to live with that event the rest of their life.
Right.
And so if it causes real harm to them or collateral damage to the family, they replay that like an instant replay in their mind over and over, hoping that ball will go through the goalpost, but knowing it likely won't, until they can come to a place where they can get a do-over. And
Okay.
maybe this time they'll be successful. So they're looking for a different outcome. And as a counselor, what a counselor does is it brings them through that, gets them to realize the reality of you missed the goalpost. It's not the end of your life or anything like that. You'll have another chance. When the other chance comes, be ready for that chance. And, you know, but some will act out on it and will do bad things.
Yeah.
It leads them to do even evil things.
Mm.
We see that in prisons. When you counsel in prisons, you find these guys who are guilty of rape or murder or something like that, something horrible like that, and they want a different outcome in their life. They don't want to be known as that, and so they live their life looking for a different outcome. And this, uh, them learning that it's a chronic reaction to that traumatic event that you have to get a hold of and not react chronically to it, and um, and then things smooth out. And I write about people in that book, in the Set Free book,
Hmm.
who did exactly that, and
Okay.
how it smoothed out. In other words, they went from fear to faith, they went from anxiety to assurance, they went from moodiness and mood swings to maturity, they went from isolation to involvement, from lying to leadership, and all that. So they were able to smooth that rough path out. And so the
Okay.
Bible gives us all of those examples for us to be able to get through this thing to this. And one thing I don't say to them, Shy, is get over it.
Yeah.
You don't get over rape.
Yeah.
It's not like a disease that you can say, okay, I'll take some medicine and it won't be there any longer. It's always there. We say, let's get through it. Let's
Right.
get to the other side. And when you get to the other side and you have some understanding, then you can operate in society like you want to operate, and leave that as far behind as it's possible for you to leave it. Does that make sense?
It does. It does. And I love that you use different Bible characters to demonstrate how God brings us through the situation and walks with us through it. And I also appreciate the fact that you ascribe to the biblical solution. I know you mentioned on the back of your book how psychology sometimes puts us into buckets and categories and
Yes,
based on
it
our
will.
behavior, but ultimately the Bible has the prescription for us because it was created. We were created,
Individually
yes,
for
individually,
you. Yes.
right?
God,
So,
God doesn't put us into He doesn't put us into behavior groups. He
mhm,
deals with us individually. He lives in our life. If we're a follower of Christ, He lives in our life, and it's all individual to us. Each of us have a secret place where He wants to meet with us and commune with us and answer questions with us alone out of Satan's reach. And that secret place in Psalm 91 is where He says, you go there. There's no less than 18 promises. When you and He are there, and only you and He can go there.
yeah,
Your spouse can't go there with you. Your children can't go there with you. Your counselor can't go there with you. Your pastor, only you and God can go there. And that's where He deals with you, in that secret place. And He has His plan for you individually, not a group. Isn't that wonderful?
that is wonderful. He is our creator, and so he would know what we need best. So,
Yeah, well said. Yes.
okay, so let's talk about one of the examples that you use, Job. We all have heard of the story of Job and how he lost everything and then how God blessed him with double. But Job went through a lot, and you describe him as having anxiety, and with all of his questioning and how God walked with him through that. And it seems like there was a lot of mental activity Job had to deal with that, maybe a psychologist would identify as depression or something like that, that qualifies as one of those buckets we just talked about. Why do you think it's so important for us to deal with our thoughts? Because in the end, God turned it around on Job, and he ended up asking Job the questions, right? So
Yeah, right.
I'm interested in how you see God's prescription for what Job went through, and how we as Christians can take from that.
It's so interesting because I've always heard, and my father was a pastor, and so I've grown up in church, and I've always heard of Job, patience, be like Job, all of this, and when I really got into it, especially for this book, and I started reading through Job and go back to all of my education and get back into those classes, how they teach you to interpret in the Bible. And so when I got into the depth of that, I saw the first 3 chapters of the book of Job are nothing but anxiety in Job. One right after another of traumatic events happened to him. Now, is he going to suffer trauma? Because the trauma will be how he reacts to those events. It's the chronic reaction to it. So he lost his family. 7 children died. He lost all of his property. He lost all of his cattle. He lost his image in the community. He lost fame. All of those things he lost, to the point where his wife couldn't stand it anymore, and she thought it'd be better for him to just curse God and die. And it was difficult on her because it wasn't happening to her, specifically. Collaterally it was, but not specifically.
Right.
And so then those 3 chapters, then all of a sudden you have 27 chapters of Job's looking for answers. He wants to find answers. And he went to his friends. He got bad advice from 3 friends. And finally, another friend came along and gave him better advice. Now, God, when it came down to it, God didn't like the advice that those first 3 friends gave, and they suffered consequences for that advice, that the wrong advice that they gave Job. And then God finally said to Job, I want to talk to you personally. And he said some pretty harsh things. Where were you when I created the earth? Where were you? He was reminding Job, I got this. I'm not shocked by this.
Right.
As a matter of fact, I was trying to prove to the evil one how great I think of you and how great you are. And so this is a trial you've been through. So hang on, I've got this for you. So when you look at Job, even his friends saw the anxiety and they wrote about it. It's in the book of it's in the scripture. His anxiety is there. His anguish is there. His anxiety turned to anguish. When you read Job, and they say his anguish is incredible. His friends were just appalled at what Job was going through and how that was coming out. They were close to him and they could see his reaction to all of those events that happened to him. So there's Job with anxiety, and then it went to anguish. We saw the anguish, and then it goes to arguing. He starts arguing with God. Don't
I
we
haven't
do
done that? I don't know if I've done that. I'm sure I have.
He starts arguing with God, and he's looking for answers.
Yeah.
And so between the two, the anxiety, the anguish, his arguments, and his answers that he got, he finally got to assurance. In the last few chapters, you see his assurance, and God rewarded him by giving him twice what he had before.
Yeah.
And so I want that to, in that chapter, when people read that, I want them to understand God's got this.
Mm,
Whatever happened to you, God got this.
yeah.
Who knows if he's not saying to Shy, to the evil one, have you noticed her?
Mm-hmm.
Have you noticed her faithfulness? I'm
Mm-hmm.
proud of her.
Mm-hmm.
I'm proud of how she's ready. How do we know that's not what he's doing? If he
Yeah.
did it to Job, he could be. In other words, nothing happens to us that doesn't first go through the fingers of God. So
Amen.
he's not unaware of where you are. He's got this. And that's what Job finally found. And that's where he found the assurance, is when he realized God had this all along.
Yeah. It's so relatable, when we think about like the COVID situation and how there were so many people that lost family members and
Yeah.
lost income and employment, and I'm sure had questions just like Job did. And you know to know that God uses Job and included Job as an example for us normalizes these traumas for
Very
us,
good. Yes, it really
so
does.
that we don't feel like he's picking on us or that it's our fault, and
Yeah.
that, like you said, that there's some greater story at work for us. And so I think that's encouraging for our listeners to know that this is very, very normal. One question I have is, in terms of the faith community, we have struggled to embrace mental health. I don't know if you feel like it's improving, because you've been in ministry for a long time. Why do you think that we're so reluctant to acknowledge that we might be struggling with depression or anxiety or some other trauma?
Oh, that is a great question, because everybody does. And I think it's because that Christians aren't supposed to have problems.
Mm,
In
mhm,
other words, if you tell a friend, if you come to Jesus, he'll take care of those problems for you. And we preach that. You
mhm.
come to him, and we make that sound like then life is going to smooth out and you're going to be on an asphalt pathway, not a bumpy, rocky dirt road. It's going to be smooth for you the rest of your life. And so because we believe that, when we see that's not true, then we think, well, maybe it's me.
Yeah.
Maybe it's not the other person, because the other person looks like they're doing just fine. And it's image. I'm not
Mm,
supposed to have problems, so I'm not going to tell you I've got problems. And if I tell you I've got problems, then all the counsel I've given to you, you'll think, well, he doesn't know because he's got the same problems I do. So it's that image thing that we have, we're not supposed to have. But I think that is, I really see in all my years of ministry, I really see that changing. I've always believed in mental health,
yeah.
because I've seen the scripture says in Luke 2:52 that Jesus grew in wisdom and stature and in favor with God and man. He
Mhm.
grew in favor with man. That's his social component. He grew in favor with God. That's a spiritual component. He grew in wisdom and stature. That's his mental capacity, and that's his physical capacity. So whatever happened to him mentally and physically really is registered in the emotion, and our emotions then will tell us what's going on physically and mentally. And so we know we have difficulties, but we won't admit that they might be mental or neurological or something like that.
Mhm.
When we get disconnected, I love what Larry Crabb said in his book Connecting. He's a Christian psychologist and one of the best. He said that most of the people that come in for counseling to him do not have psychological disorders. They are disconnected souls. They're
Wow.
looking for a connection there. And when you find that connection, then all of that settles out. Now, there is true mental illness, but
Mhm.
most of us, uh, we need to be careful not to attribute mental illness to spiritual misunderstanding or spiritual difficulty. That's not mental illness, that's spiritual. but there is truly mental illness, and I'm for everything that our world can create and do, the medicines they get to help people chill and live a normal life. People always ask me, "What do you think?" I think those are from God. All wisdom comes from God,
Mm,
um, and He gives us that, just like He gives us, like Paul told Timothy, you got stomach problems, take a little wine for your stomach's sake. You
mm,
know, God gave us that. So let it help it chill you a little bit, because you've got a more important job to do. And if we have medicines that help chill us for the things that have hurt us mentally, I think we ought to check them out.
mm,
My mentor, who's one of my mentors, Dr. Henry Brandt, he was the dean of Christian psychologists and really started the Christian psychologist movement. He taught Dobson, he taught LaHaye, he taught Nairmore. He he was, he, but we became friends, and he saw something in me, and he taught me a lot. I sat in on some of his sessions when he was counseling people. Um, and that's some of the things that helped me the most, is watching him counsel. He
mhm,
asked me one time, he said, "Otis, do you know why people take medicine for depression and the mental things? Do you know why they take it?" Well, I was waiting for some deep uh, psychological answer. And I said, "No, doc, why do they take them?" He said, "Because they work." I said, "Okay." And I did what you did. I laughed. And he said, "They do. But the problem is, your body gets used to it, immune to it. So they have to strengthen them. And then it will get used to that. Then we have to strengthen that." And he
mhm,
said, "So what you want to do is you want to use these things that God has given us to get you to a point so that you can find the true answer in your spiritual and in your emotional and in your social or relational life, and it will chill out." And that's what we do. We don't take aspirin or ibuprofen every day. We take it when we need it,
right.
And so uh, to get uh, to get us to that point where it that medicine will help us then smooth out and get back into society as a productive member.
Wow. Yeah, I think normalizing it from that perspective helps us all to embrace that God has provided us solutions and He gives us wisdom. And
He
so I
does.
appreciate that perspective. Okay, let's get into some of the other points you make in your book. You mentioned the trauma of the unknown. What do you mean by that?
That's one of the most difficult, because we worry about what never happens, and we don't know how life is going to turn out.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's the unknown.
Okay.
How's they tell us that we 90 something percent, it's in the 90 percentile of things we worry about never happen.
Wow.
And yet the 90% destroys our life, because it creates fear and anxiety, it creates moodiness, it creates isolation, it creates all of these things, and it
Mm-hmm.
creates trauma in our life over something that's not even going to happen, Shy. and
Mm-hmm.
and I say in the book, I write two stories. I talk about when I was 7 year old and when I first encountered my first haunted house. I
Yeah.
was I was so scared.
Mhm.
Me and my buddy, we were so scared. We went through it, and we got through it. We realized that we knew those people in there. They weren't ghoulish ghosts. We go to church with them. It was in the children's program. They're a teacher at church, and we realized that blood was maple chocolate syrup or something like that. And all that. We realized we went through there. We were afraid for nothing. So next year when we went through it, we weren't nearly as anxious. It was more fun. And I also use another about the ancient cartographers when they were making their maps. There was territory that was unexplored, and that unexplored territory the cartographers would put on there because they didn't know what was there. They would say, "Here be dragons, here be fiery serpents," because they thought if you go there, it's unknown. You may not come back.
Yeah.
Well, the explorers went to those areas. Were there dragons? Nope.
No.
Were there fiery serpents? Nope. Were there problems? Yes,
Mhm.
but not those.
Mhm.
There were problems that humans could solve.
Yeah.
And so in our life, we have the idea that if I go there, dragons are out there, or if I try to explore that, there's fiery serpents there, or it's like being in a haunted ghoulish ghost will get me, and all that sort. It's the unknown. Don't let the unknown traumatize you,
Yeah.
uh, because it probably 90% chance it's not going to happen.
Mhm.
But we worry about it anyway.
We do, and you're right. When the things we worry about most of the time don't end up happening, and we are essentially traumatizing ourselves.
Indeed.
So I think about how God tells us to renew our minds, and one of the things that we teach our clients at Greater Impact is how to do that, how to take your thoughts captive and replace it with the truth. And I noticed you talked about creating a happy life and
Yeah.
how positivity is so important in moving from trauma and fear to faith. Can you talk about why that's so important and why God tells us to do this? Because clearly, if he's saying it, that must be the solution. But we often get caught up
Yeah.
in that ruminating over things that, like you said, just never happen.
Never happened. And I have people come and sit down, and they tell me, Pastor, I'm depressed. Well, if it's not a clinical issue that's above my pay grade, that they need to see a psychiatrist or something like that. If it's not a clinical depression, it's just garden variety depression that we all suffer, and some suffer it more deeply, that garden variety, than others. I really get to them very quickly about their thought life, because
Mhm.
the Bible says very clearly that what you think in your heart, that's what you become. So if you're depressed, you're probably thinking depressing thoughts. So
Mhm.
you've got to get them off of those depressing thoughts. And certain personality types will be more prone to depression than others. And
Mhm.
so if you find out that that's their personality type, then you can help them get that's a weakness of theirs. You can help them get it over to a strength. But as you think in your heart, that's what you become. So God says to us, don't think those thoughts. As a matter of fact, Paul, to the Philippian church, in I think it's Philippians 4:8, he said, um, think on whatsoever things are pure, whatsoever things are honest, whatsoever things are of a good report.
Mhm.
And he names all these positive things. Think on these.
Mhm.
Why think on those? Because that's what you're going to become. When you think on those,
Mhm.
you become what you think on. So Paul was very, very adamant about that. And I really believe this: quality thoughts are important to us. Thinking depressing thoughts are not quality thoughts,
Mhm. Mhm.
but quality thoughts are positivity's favorite food. And if you're thinking quality thoughts, positivity comes in, and you see life from a different perspective. You're still going to have problems, but you see those problems as solvable. You see those problems as something God's bringing into your life, where you will, obviously you're going to need to grow in this area, or he gives you that, according to Second Corinthians chapter 2, chapter 1, I think is verse 2. He gives you that so that he's got somebody coming into your life that's going to suffer, that has suffered through that, and he's going to take you through it first so that
Right.
you can work with that person.
Mhm.
And so maybe that's why it may be, it's all in God's plan. God's got this, so we have to think that direction. And quality thoughts are positivity's favorite food. What you think, you're going to become. So it's up to you if you want to have depressing thoughts or not.
Yeah.
If you want to be depressed, think depressing thoughts, and you'll be depressed.
Yeah. And that's where the creating the happy life.
You don't stumble across a happy life. You create it. It's intentional.
Okay. I love it. Love it. Okay, just a couple more questions before we wrap up. You also mentioned self-control and then you distinguish it from self-mastery. What is What is really the difference there?
Self-control is temporary. Self-mastery is eternal.
Oh,
Um, uh, you might control yourself today because you're on a diet. And when you're off of that diet, you're not going to control yourself with that anymore because you don't need to.
mm-hmm,
Um, uh, and it's like deny self, but the devil knows if you can deny yourself and you try to control self, that he's going to come at you harder because he knows you probably better than you know yourself. The devil does.
mm-hmm,
He's watched you,
mm-hmm,
and he's going to know what to put in front of you to tempt you to get you not to control self.
mm-hmm.
Self control is a I think it's an event. Oh, I controlled myself on that, but boy, I didn't over here. Self mastery is a way of life. You have mastered self, and you have these things that you're not going to do, and you can't even be tempted in them
Mm-hmm.
because you've mastered your life. You've mastered self,
Mm-hmm.
and that's the old King James uses the word temperance. The New King James uses the word self control, and a lot of the others. But if you go back into the original language, I don't know how they can interpret that as self control because that's not what the original language says. It says master of yourself. And
Okay.
so it's self mastery. It's not self control. Um, I tell people sometimes I'll say, here's an illustration. Try this. Try to think no bad thoughts for the next 5 minutes. Just sit quietly and try to think no bad thoughts for the next 5 minutes. Every evil thought you could ever think or ever thought will come to you at that point.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
and and so you try to control yourself. You try to control. Self mastery is more allowing God to control self,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and self control is saying, "Okay, I got this.
Yeah.
I'll control self." And I like self control. I
Right.
don't think it's a negative, but I don't think that goes far enough when we're talking about the fruit of the spirit.
Okay. I love that. Self mastery means you're depending on God rather than yourself. And I think that is the takeaway when you're dealing with trauma and when God takes us from fear to faith. He is the key ingredient in getting to the self mastery to where
Yeah.
we no longer struggle with that wanting to replay, wanting to act out, wanting to do the thing that,
Oh, you're connecting those dots so clearly.
is that right? Am I connecting the
Yes.
dots?
Wow, that's great. That's
Yeah,
terrific.
yeah. Well, this was really fun. I learned a lot just in these few minutes. I just want to close by saying you've served as a pastor, you've served as a counselor, you've dealt with a lot of people over the years. What is your final advice? We have a lot of our couples who struggle with conflict in their marriages. Some of them are separated. Some of them are really struggling and want to give up. What is your advice to our listeners who may have a traumatic situation that they're walking through?
Well, likely that person has come to a place where psychologists call existential despair or existential crisis,
Mm-hmm.
which means they have lost purpose and they've lost their meaning in life.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where they are, and that's not particularly a bad place to be because it's not a psychological disorder. It's just that you come to a point where you don't think you have worth anymore. That doesn't mean you don't have worth. It's just you're at a point and trauma has taken you to the point where you don't. So don't allow that to happen. And this is the way you, everything I can say, rely on family, rely on your loved ones, the people that love you the most. Don't be closed off to them. Be open to them because they're the ones that want to help you and they see it in you and they want to help you. Rely on loved ones and express how you feel. The worst thing you can do is keep it inside
Mm-hmm.
because the devil can beat you up if
Mm-hmm.
you don't have somebody telling you, that's not true. And this is the reason that's not true. And that's the problem, that those friends of Job, that's what they were telling him. What did you do? You must have done something terrible for God to do this to you. He did nothing terrible. So express how you feel and find joy in the little things in life. And Shai, probably the most important thing I could say is focus on what you can control.
Yeah.
Don't focus on what you cannot control.
Mm-hmm.
Any coach knows that he cannot coach that other team on the other sideline. So he won't try to coach those players that are trying to kill his boys or beat his boys up. He only coaches his boys. He can't control them. So don't try to control something you can't control.
Mm-hmm.
Focus on what you can control. And I think keeping a gratitude journal is a great idea.
Mm-hmm.
The good things that have happened to you, practice mindfulness and meditation, and join a small group. Get in a small group, get in a connect group that will help you and will surround you. And all of that will help you reconnect with your life's purpose. I'm working with a man now who tells me I can say whatever I want to say about it. I'm just not his name. But he doesn't need money. He said, if I stopped working now, I would never have to work. He drives a very expensive car, all of that. And he will tell you he does that. But he just has no purpose in his life anymore.
Wow.
And that's what we are doing. We're reconnecting with his life's purpose. What is that life's purpose? I've had such super success with him in this. And I would say to anybody that's listening to this podcast, reconnect with your life's purpose. You are here for a reason. If your reason was over, God would take you out of this world and give you your reward in heaven. But because you're here, you still have purpose. What is that purpose? What talents has he given you? What spiritual gifts has he given you? How can you put those together? And how can you make a difference in one person's life? It's all you need. In that one, and then the next one, and then the next one. And I would say, take those steps because you are unique. There's nobody else like you. And God has a purpose for you. He has divine appointments for you. Find those divine appointments and be true to them as you partner with God.
Wow. So rich, so good. Thank you so much, Dr. Ledbetter. This has been such a blessing. And I just wanted to give our listeners a view of the book. It's called Set Free, and it's about releasing the damage of trauma. Please definitely go to his website. We can find Dr. Ledbetter at JOLEDBETTRER JOLedbetter.com.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, if you enjoyed today's episode, we invite you to check out our website, greaterimpactwives.org, for more information about Greater Impact. We have a free PDF for you to download called 5 Tools for How to Stop Walking on Eggshells. We also have an e-course to offer for you. And yeah, we have more episodes for you to check out. So we thank you for joining, and we'll see you next time.